start it. The music has never failed to get laugh. So
I feel like I'm about to be in a porn, man.
well, that's not what I was going for. Honestly, of the options, I thought that was the best one. I have my own podcast audio for my other podcast here, but unfortunately, that one is just singing about my other podcast. So we're going with the music in a can. This is episode 4 of the Will Berkman Variety Podcast, which is now known as Delving Deeper. And I'm joined by Josh Lyras, who goes by the tag Sora, and he's Australia's best Super Smash Bros. Melee player. Josh, thanks so much for giving us your time.
No, it's all good, man.
Now, the majority of my listeners probably don't know that people even compete in Super Smash Bros. And in fact, the majority of my listeners probably don't even know that I have any interest in a Nintendo game. But I would call myself a recreational player who finds the whole process really interesting. But in my dabbling in the game, I've come across a whole bunch of people who've given me advice on how to get better. And a lot of that advice, I think, has been sort of broadly extrapolable to other things in life. And so I wanted to talk to you about what it is like to be a professional player, and also how you go about getting better and better in a field that's sort of quintessentially competitive as your competitive opportunities diminish, because I think that'll be really interesting. So before we even get on to that stuff, though, I want to know what it's like to be a professional gamer. So before we started recording, you told me that you are now doing gaming stuff full-time. What's a day of work look like for you?
It honestly depends on like the level of seriousness you're going for, because like with anything, there's competitive, there's like off seasons, right? And this is most likely going to be announced soonish, but the Smashboard Tour qualifier that was coming up, for those who don't know what that is, it's a worldwide event where people from all around the world get to qualify for a grand final tournament. Think of it like that, where like the best in the world all get to compete. Like Oceania was going to have a qualifier for this, where only one person was going to be able to go. But unfortunately, because of COVID, it got pushed back and back and back. And eventually they said, we're going to scrap it and send the first seed or the best player, which is me. So they're going to be sending just me now over to the tournament instead of that qualifier. So that's giving me nothing to really immediately practice for because that until that main tournament. So I'm in a sort of off season right now. So for now, it's a lot of just casual practice, playing against other like good players as much as I can. A lot of VOD review where you go over your own videos and like analyze your own play. But outside of that, I used to work part-time as well, just to kind of financially sustain myself, because let's just face it, gaming in Australia, you can't financially sustain yourself on it, but it's just almost impossible, especially something like a 2001 children's party game like Super Smash Bros. Melee. So it's definitely not where you want to be to make money. It's 100% a passion project right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know that Super Smash Bros. Worldwide is not the most lucrative game to play. The prize money is not enormously high. Nintendo doesn't support it very well. So for you as a pro gamer, what things are you actually doing to make ends meet? Are you just streaming? Are you coaching people? Do you rely on sponsors? What else is there?
So the sponsors 100% help. My sponsor right now, Mind Freak, they definitely help me out with just like getting to tournaments and stuff like that, like a bit of financial help as well outside of that. So I'm definitely very blessed to do that, to have that even. But with a lot of the time, you have to work a part-time job or a full-time job, especially if you live out of home like I was for a while. Recently moved back in with my grandparents because of COVID, and I lost my job at the time. But yeah, there's just not enough tournaments in Australia. Even in the US, if you're not streaming on Twitch, which is where all the pros get their money, no one in the world is living like entirely off tournament winnings right now, like at least well. It's just impossible. So there has to be some alternate source of income, because it's just not, it's everyone who does it is doing it like to a detriment. Like they're not gaining much from it other than like Mango gaining like popularity, right? But even then, it just like helps him through getting a popular stream. So you have to do something else.
There are documentaries about this that go for hours and hours and hours. But could you maybe give the audience a very brief primer on why it is that Smash has such a strong competitive history and such a strong community, but isn't necessarily supported by Nintendo? Like you say, it's a 2001 children's party game. There's been a few editions out since, but we still used to play this one.
So why is Nintendo not supporting?
Yeah, why is Nintendo not support it, and why is it so hard to make ends meet as a competitor?
Right, absolutely. So especially in Australia, we're just a smaller country overall, and we're already playing something extremely niche. When there's like already a new version of Smash, right? But even for like the later, like the Smash Ultimate players, which is the latest one, they just can't really do it either. We just don't have the, I guess, the numbers to really like show people how serious this is, compared to the US. And even then, with Nintendo, they're more like a traditional company where video games aren't a chance for esports. To them, it's nowhere near as much as like you see like Brawlhalla, which is just like another platform fighter by an indie dev, millions of dollars in their prize pools. You know, you could actually live off these tournaments. We've all seen Fortnite. You know, Epic Games has put in millions and millions. Like, it's changed people's lives winning one of these tournaments. If you win like one Melee tournament, you're probably gonna get like $5,000 USD. Like, and these things happen like months apart. You can't live off of that. Like, it's not possible. And Nintendo, just being that traditional company, doesn't support it. They don't really know what esports is properly. Like, it's a bit ignorant to say they don't know what esports is as a whole, but they don't invest in it and they don't connect with their scenes properly. Like, they're just not taking it seriously. So it's really hard as like someone who plays one of their games to, I guess, live off of it, because we just have no developer support at all. It's awful.
So the obvious question, again, to somebody who doesn't know about Smash would be to say, then why do you bother playing this one? Because there are all these other games out there. So what is it about Super Smash Bros. And particularly Melee that has attracted you to invest so much of your time and, in ways, money into, because you're foregoing opportunities to do other things in order to pursue this?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I've been asked a lot, as well as asked myself a lot. I'm like, man, I wish I was just good at Fortnite. Like, god damn it, I'm playing the wrong one. Like, you see League, you see like Dota 2, these $1 million tournaments, right? And it's just like, why am I playing this one? Why this game? And it's just, no other game has this, and it's really hard to describe, you know, to the average person. Like, I feel like even for yourself, right? If they're like, why do you play this game? It's like, well, I know this game has Mario and Princess Peach in it, but no game gives me this like freedom of expression and freedom of movement that I like want from a video game. Melee is notorious for having this extremely high skill floor. To even like walk in Melee or just like do basic movement, it takes months. Like, we've all been there. Anyone who's played Melee will know that like when you play someone who's better than you, you know, like they're flying across the stage, they're like, the way they move their character, it's so quick and technical, and it's like really practiced and precise. And all you think, if you're into the game, all you think when you're playing that is like, I want to do that. You know, like, I want to be able to do what this guy is doing in the game. And the whole journey in Melee of just like getting better and better and better and fixing your mistakes and like eventually applying the mental game to Melee. There's nothing I've played a lot of games, and like I've tried to find like other things that have like interested me as much, but nothing has ever hit that spot that Melee hits. And I feel like a lot of Melee players will tell you that it's this extremely, extremely niche game that like delivers something that nothing I've ever played or done has ever before. And that's why I'm doing it, losing a lot of money doing it.
So I have given quite a bit of thought to how I would explain why Melee is interesting to me, because I've had to try to do it to friends who don't play games and to girls who are like, you know, you're a personal trainer and you like surfing and you're pissed, and then you're choosing to spend your weekend sometimes playing Nintendo online with boys. It makes no sense. And I sort of think of it on like 3 levels that once you begin to understand them, and this is just the nature of the game itself, once you begin to understand them, you can sort of see why it can be so rewarding to do what you said and try and refine your play. And the first is what you said about how hard it is just to do simple things. So the game runs at 60 frames per second, and you have to do a whole bunch of inputs, some of which are very precise to execute whatever idea you want. And many of them occur within very narrow windows. So sometimes you've only got a 30th or a 60th of a second to get something right. And if you can hit that thing, that can be the difference between success or failure at executing one of your ideas. So that already makes things a little bit challenging. But then on top of that, you need to layer in a whole bunch of context-based decisions. And so that adds a tactical element to that already difficult execution element. Because otherwise you could just play Tetris or something where you're still having to do something mechanically difficult or whatever. But suddenly you're having to make tactical decisions. So you're rewarded not just for pressing the buttons right, but choosing where to put yourself. And then the sort of meta level above that is once you are making good tactical decisions and either executing well or capitalizing on your opponent's mistakes, you have to start to take notice of actually how they approach the game, because the game so consistently puts you in different situations where people have traits in how they respond to them or what options they choose to take, and you begin to be rewarded for playing the game quite interactively. So it takes you from this very internal focus of, can I just press these buttons right, to a quite external focus of, while I am pressing these buttons right, what can I do to manipulate my opponent or whatever it happens to be to give myself an advantage? And because all three of those layers are sort of so interrelated, it can become quite intoxicating because you can always feel yourself getting better at one or lacking in another. And it's a bit like, this sounds terrible, but it's like playing the pokies, where you see just, you're so close to hitting the jackpot sometimes. You're like, that was a really near miss. You know, if I just spin the wheel one more time. Well, very often with Melee, it's like that. You have this unique situation where you're like, I nearly did that thing I want to do, that thing that you said was expressive and exciting. I nearly did it, but I just missed it. You better roll the dice again and see if I can get
you want to chase it. Yeah, no, I think you're spot on, man. I think that it's almost exactly like the pokies. When you get that jackpot, though, nothing hits quite like it. You know, when you hit that thing, you've been like, you're like, what if I miss this? What if I don't hit this? And then you get it, and you're like, oh, yeah, I'm the sickest guy in the room right now. You feel so good about yourself when you just like hit the things in this game. And it sounds embarrassing to say out loud, you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, I made Princess Peach do that. Woo! It's like, what are you talking about, man? Like, get over yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it is outrageous. No,
Yeah.
and one of the things that is, it's like paradoxical almost, because like you are Princess Peach or something at the time.
Yeah.
But of all the games that I've played, it's one of the ones where you feel the most like your character on the screen is an avatar of you. And I think that's a very sort of Nintendo design trait. In fact, they had a word for it that I heard where they were trying to describe like the joy of making Mario jump when they were making Super Mario 64. But there's like a feeling of a Nintendo game, and Melee seems to have captured it really well, where when you are pressing the controller, you don't feel like I'm pressing my controller and disconnected from that Peach is walking around the screen. You really do feel like you're almost in the box in some way. It's crazy.
I've never really thought about it like that, but I've never you kind of like almost there, you know, like you feel like when your character moves, I think that stems as well from that freedom of movement that the game gives too, you know. It's never like because the rules make sense, you know. It's kind of like, it sounds crazy to say, it's just like, you know, like in life, right? It's like if I like hit this desk, there's like resistance and like I get this feeling, you know. Melee has kind of captured that to a really similar degree. It's like when I hit this tipper with Marth, I know Marth has like a sword in the game, and the very tip of his sword like does extra damage, and it just has this satisfying rip to it. And like you're like, yep, I was here, he was there. That like rip made sense. I knew how to get to where I needed to be. I knew he'd be there. Like all these factors, like you don't think about them because they eventually start to feel like natural, you know. But there's enough depth to it where it's not like, yeah, I press punch on the controller and character punch. Like it's not the same to that, you know. It's really, really deep. But it's honestly just like the main reason why everyone plays this game. It's so addicting, like you said. It's intoxicating.
And it's bizarre because it seems to have been largely accidental. You know, it happened 20-something years ago, and Melee was made, I know, on a very short development cycle. But in spite of that, it has what you're talking about is kind of game physics. It has game physics that are incredibly sort of self-contained and logical. And in spite of never being patched or fixed or anything since, I mean, there are elements of Melee which people say are broken, truly. But in spite of that, it's still like, it just makes sense. You play the game and it kind of feels very right in a way that is very hard to put voice to.
Absolutely. And it's honestly insane how much they got right. I think it was like a year and a half of development time, which is insane for a game as big as Melee. Like, there's like so many characters, like for the time, I think it's like 26 if I'm not mistaken, which is pretty big. There's so many stages, the adventure mode, like on such a small span. And it was rushed too. Like they said, there were some things like that are in there that are like genuinely unfinished. Like one of the characters can't do a technique called L canceling, which is just like an oversight because they didn't have time to finish him up. Game Watch, he poor little guy. He wasn't meant to. But there's little things that you notice that are just like, yeah, these guys were pushing it out the door, but it still feels so polished, you know, which is so funny. And like, so many games have tried to attain what Melee has. Like, there's so many games, like Project M is it's Super Smash Bros. Brawl, which is the one that came after on the Nintendo Wii. It's a mod, which made it feel more like Melee, which was the predecessor. And a lot of Melee players pick this game up and they're playing it. They're just like, it's not right. Like this game, which was like made for Melee players for Brawl to feel like Melee. It's not recreatable. Like you can't recreate it. They're just like, nah, something just feels off. It's a little bit like you can just feel it. You know, it's good, like a tangible thing. Yeah, it's just like you've put in the things, right? You've done it, like, but something's not right here. Like it doesn't feel. The sound design's not the same, which is a big thing. Like you don't get that feedback that you do from Melee, and it's just you can ask almost like any Melee player, and I'll promise you they'll say like, no, Melee's different. You know, it's its own thing.
I mean, I've played Project M a little bit, and it's very good fun. But you said, it's not quite the same. It's a bit like if you have an Nespresso coffee pod, as opposed to if you walk down the road and your barista makes a proper coffee. They're both good.
Yeah. But you don't see the man swirl the milk in front of you. You know what I mean? It's not the same. Me just like one eye closed, just pouring like cold milk in, just smacking my lips in the morning. It's not, there's no love in it. No. There is love in PM. I'm not saying there's no love in PM. I'm just saying it's not the same.
I was going to say the Smash community is not big enough for you to alienate a portion of it in this podcast. So
sorry, guys.
That kind of speaks to the nature of the game. It's incredibly complex, and there's so many avenues for improvement. The other thing about Melee that I found really interesting, because before I had ever played Melee, I have a Nintendo 64, and two of my oldest friends and I still play Super Smash Bros. 64, which is one step older than Melee. It's a great fun game. But before I'd ever played Melee, I saw the Smash documentary on YouTube. And I think it's an 8-part documentary. It's really long. And I started watching little bits of it. And it was sort of detailing the competitive history of Super Smash Bros. Through till about 2013. I think that's roughly when the Smash doc finishes. Yeah. So it was about a 10-year period where they were talking about the history of this game. And there were all these players who came up and through, and all these characters and all these developments in the scene, and this really sort of important community-driven historical elements of the game that happened in that first decade that has continued all the way through till now. And there are people, if you watch the Super Smash Bros. Documentary...
1 second, sorry.
No, you're right, mate. There are people who...
Sorry, you go.
No, you're right. There are people who, if you watch the Smash documentary, are still involved in the scene now. But those storylines and that competitive history adds another element of interest to the game. Because not only do you see the way in which people are playing the game developing in front of you, but you also sort of see the characters involved. And I mean characters as in the people playing the game.
Yeah, the
involved developing too.
Game, right.
Yeah, and so I think when you add on that layer as well, it gives the game a richness that, you know, you joke about like wanting to play Fortnite, but because Fortnite's only a few years old, it doesn't have that same history to it. You know, in the same way, like I'm a rugby fan.
Yeah.
And when you see somebody do something in rugby and you think like, you know, wow, this game has progressed since Jonah Lomu was playing or since David Campese was playing before him and so on, you know, that adds an element of interest to rugby as well. You know, and I think Smash has...
100%.
Yeah.
Dude, Smash has this story that, like, not many other esports have. Like, when... It's so fun talking to people about Melee when there's like upcoming tournaments, especially pre-coronavirus. There was like, oh my god, like there's because not many people are going to know, there's this, the documentary talks about the 5 gods of the game, who are just like these 5 players who only these guys were winning tournaments. Like they were the only people winning. And it would talk about like who's going to win the next tournament, will anyone be able to beat the 5 gods? And it's these storylines that it's like, oh my God, like it's one of the tournaments, Genesis, like 5 of the gods are going to be there. And like one of the guys, Leffen, who's like known as the God Slayer, because he took a set off all of them, like who's going to win? Like, is Mango going to play Leffen again? These guys have the best sets ever. Like, you just want to watch, not just for the raw gameplay. It's like a TV show. Like, when Mango's like the most popular Smash player easily, like in the world. He's just like this guy who doesn't fit the archetype of like a regular nerd. He's some guy who gets like blackout drunk and like sack taps his mates while he's streaming. Like, that's just Mango. And like, he's the craziest like player. He plays like the fastest characters in the game, and the way he moves is like awe-inspiring. It's so, there's no rhyme or reason to it a lot of the time. And when you watch him play, and just like who he is as a person, you just like, I want this guy to win because this guy is breaking the mold. And I remember specifically, I was like watching him win a tournament. It's like the Big House 9 against this guy who was just Zane, who was looking unbeatable. Everyone was like, he's just going to win the whole thing. He's the best. And Mango just clutches it out in like I think it was like a game 10 set. I can't remember. It was.
I recall watching it. Yeah.
One of the best sets. I remember like the group chats I was in, just boom. Everyone's like, I love Melee. Melee's the best. Mango's the best. Like, I'm going to play 12 hours when I get home. Let's go. Like, this is the, like, it's so weird that like this video game can make people feel like this. You know what I mean? And it's just like, you can just like jump in and do these things these guys are doing as well. Like, that's what's so cool about it. Like, you don't have to be, it's like when you watch like tennis or something, it's like, yeah, I can't play like Roger Federer does. But in Melee, you can kind of feel like you can, because all that inhibits you is just like your like mind almost, which is so cool. It's awesome. And I think Melee is like one of the closest things I've seen to like regular sports, where it's just like that hype of your team winning.
That was actually one of the analogies I was going to draw. This is going to make it sound very childish, but we are talking about a children's party game that we've got
yeah.
views. So, and that is to say that in some ways it's actually very like watching, UFC. Like when you watch MMA fighters, all of them have different ways in which they approach fighting, and you can see some of their personality become manifest in how they play. And that's part of what draws your interest into the game. And I feel like Melee has that element too, but with almost like a WWE bent to it, where, the things you can do can be so extreme and so expressive and so outlandish. But the fact is that the game gives you an avenue to exercise that desire that you might have had when you were 8 years old to pretend to be a WWE wrestler, in a way
it's insane.
It's very, very rewarding. I'm curious before we actually talk a little bit more about Melee itself. When you talk to your family, so you're currently living with your grandparents, how do you explain to them what you are trying to achieve?
Disclaimer: I'm Greek, so traditional values, unfortunately, very deep rooted in the fam. That it's like, how much money are you making off this? And I'm like, well, then it's like, you got to do something else, man. But they'll say that, you know what I mean? They're like, oh, how much money you make? Like that's the measurement of how good something is. Like, I could do anything else, and it's like, if it made enough money, they'd be fine with it. But then it's like, you got to make money, man. And I'm like, well, I'm self-sufficient, right? Like, I have enough money, and I've like grinded full-time work enough where I have like a decent saving, and I can pay rent. I can do like whatever I can. But it's hard to describe to them what a passion thing is. It's really weird that it's like, but there's always a but to when, or but why, or but what if, because it doesn't really. I guess we're just from different generations, like I'm privileged enough where like I can, and also I've balanced it enough where I'm like, I was able to always, even when I was like living out of home for like 6 years after I turned 18, or 5 years after I turned 18, it was just like, yep. So like, I've got enough money here. This is how much I have to work a full-time job. The rest of the time, put it into playing. And I'm like, yeah, look, I'm balancing my life. And I'm like, explaining that to them. They're like, yeah, but like, why? And it's like, well, I just want to be the best at this, like, it's hard to describe to that generation that you can succeed without there being like a financial reward to it, if that makes sense. It's really hard. But For them, they're just like, you're smart enough to do whatever you want. We know you'll like figure yourself out afterwards, which I will, right? Like I know Melee's not forever. Maybe one day I decide streaming, maybe I pick something else up. Who knows? But if I start thinking about that now, it's going to take away from what I'm doing. You know, I won't be fully invested. I'll be worried. You can't think like that.
So in a Hollywood movie, whenever like the protagonist has a family that sort of doesn't get it, there's always that moment where they have an amazing victory and their family all come on board and say like, oh my God, like, you know, we get it now and we support you. And, you know, like we're in your corner. Have you ever had that moment where you've come back from winning a major tournament or, you know, you've flown back from another city having won and had them go, you know, wow, actually like this is pretty cool. We're proud of you.
I actually did have that. I don't know if you were around for that. When I beat Professor Pro at BAM, he's like one of the best players in Europe. No, that's fair. It was the last BAM before COVID. Professor Pro is like one of the best players in Europe. And there's like one of the camera guys, he makes like documentaries or whatever, like caught the like hundreds of people just like cheering and screaming. And like, it's like a slow-mo vid, full emotional thing of like my mates, like one of my mates crying, giving me a hug. And like he put it on Facebook and tagged me in it. And my dad saw that. My dad's your true blue Aussie, mate. He's just like your mechanic. You know, he just like doesn't understand video games, which is fair. And he's just like, oh, that was pretty sick, mate. He's like, that was all right. And my stepmom, who was like always on my case about playing games in high school, fair enough, by the way. She was like, nah, like, look, I didn't really get like how invested you were in it. Like, I'm sorry about like giving you all that shit. I'm like, I wish you gave me more shit, man. I'm making nothing out of this. I'm just making like old mate down the road have a scream at the TV. Like I'm not set for life of this at all. But they do kind of get it now. They're just like, all right, like this is why you're doing this. Like not many people can say they've like made a stadium of people cheer for them. You know, that high you get off that is insane. And like that's something while I'm still young, I want to keep chasing. But they get it for sure.
So again, to the uninitiated, can you maybe give a quick rundown of what the objective is in Super Smash Bros. And how a Smash tournament set works?
Sure. So how a set works usually is it's either best of 3 or best of 5. Best of 5 being played later on in the tournament. And what you do is you pick a guy, and then your guy has 4 lives, and their guy has 4 lives, and you pick your stage or whatever you want to play on. And you just have to take that guy.
The ground that you fight on, by the way.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
Carry on.
Some characters better on other stages, but you pick and ban to get that. And you both have 4 lives. And to really summarize it, you just take his 4 lives before he takes your 4 lives, or they take your 4 lives, and that's the gist of it. Yeah, it's a really simple game to like grasp who's winning because there's 4 little pictures, and like whoever's got the least pictures or no pictures is not doing too hard.
Sure. To add a tiny bit of depth to that explanation, the way in which you actually go about taking lives, all of the characters have a bunch of basic functions that they can perform that deal damage to the other character. So you can punch them or kick them or whatever. You can do moves on the ground or in the air. And every character has a few special abilities as well. But they all work out in roughly the same way. And as you hit somebody more and more and more, you can send them further and further away. And all of those stages that Josh described sort of exist within a little box. And if you're able to knock the opposing character all the way out of that box, so you've hit them enough to build enough damage to hit them that far, then you take their life. And so the game rewards you being able to hit somebody not just once, but in succession and in a way that is able to sort of close out that life. That's probably the simplest summary of a platform fighter that you can give to somebody who doesn't otherwise play it. And what about the atmosphere of a tournament? So you've spoken about being cheered yourself. How are these things actually run? Because this is entirely community driven.
Absolutely. So these poor tournament organizers who are getting paid literally nothing, there's like a group of them. So depending on the size of the tournament, or there's just one. Small tournaments will just have one guy, and he'll make a bracket where it's like, okay, this guy's the best, we'll put him as the first seed. This guy's the worst, like a 16-man tournament, we'll put him as 16th seed. And then it's double elimination. So if you lose, there's a winner's bracket and a loser's bracket. If you lose in the winner's bracket, you go to losers bracket. You lose in losers, you're out. If you are in losers, you can still get to grand finals, just through how the bracket works out and all of that. And what the tournament organizer does is you make sure there's enough setups for everyone to play their matches on, everyone's playing their matches, and just the tournament's flowing in general. Because one thing, as a tournament organizer, one thing I will never understand is a gamer coming to a video game tournament and not playing the game. Some people just like will come to this tournament and they'll sign up to this tournament and they'll just be like, hey man, tournament started half an hour ago. Have you played your first match yet? He's like, oh yeah, I was going to get on that, eh? It's like, what? Play? Like, what are you here for? Like, please, like, you're holding the tournament up. And the worst part is online. Online, you can't like look at the guy sitting in the corner just like eating Doritos when the tournament starts. Like, they're just like away from their computer and you're just like, all right, man, like, I guess I'll have to disqualify you. And they'll come back, it's like, oh, can I still play? It's like, it's 3 hours late, man. Like, yeah, no, you can't still play. You would have suffered that as well. Being a TO is awful. But you have to
not
do it.
easy.
Someone has to do it.
I mean, it's like herding cats, you know, to try and get people to actually do things is very, very difficult. But when I did actually attend my first in-person tournament, that was with Brandon, who you've met, and it was being held at the University of New South Wales. And we walked in the door and there was row upon row of tables and all of these CRT TVs. So all the old ones that were in use, you know, when the GameCube first came out. And there were monitors and things around as well. And people had all seemed to bring their own setups. So it was entirely community driven. And setups in this instance were all Nintendo Wii's with a special memory chip in them. But this had all basically just been carted into the hall by a bunch of volunteers. And like you said, there were the tournament organisers sitting at a desk at the front with pieces of paper and computers in front of them and just, you know, manic the whole day because I think there were a few hundred people at that one. That was Phantom 2020.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of people around. And yeah, there are just people milling about. But the entire thing has been organised, like you said, off of the back of just a few people. And that for me was a very interesting experience because every other sport, you know, or sporting experience that I'd ever had been very organised and sort of sat beneath a federation or something. But for Super Smash Brothers, there doesn't appear to be that globally. It's like an agreed upon set of community rules and guidelines that basically govern everything people do without there being a formal structure above it. And that in and of itself is very interesting to me. You know, but it still happens to work.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, now that you mention that, it's been pretty interesting. There is no official governing body. People will call themselves an official governing body, but they're really, really, really not, how do I say this, organized, you know? They'll be like, we're the official council of Super Smash Brothers, man. It's like, all right, guys, who are you? Like, you know, no one cares what you're saying here. Like, the only tournament that has, like, had official rules, right, is the $200,000 Smash World Tour tournament that I was talking about earlier. And the only reason their rules are, like, being considered the rules is because their tournament had the most money in it. You know, like, that's what they're like, these guys got the most money, they'll make up the rules here. But in saying that, there has been some issues recently without a governing body with controllers. I don't know if you're personally aware, but there's a controller. See, I've got one here. So you've just got a standard, like, regular Nintendo GameCube controller, right? Like, just your normal, you know, just does whatever you need it to do. Nothing special about this one. There's a recent controller that's come out that has a different, not an official motherboard. It's a motherboard that's been specifically manufactured to be the best of the best of the best consistently. Like, it's the best controller ever. You can make one of the buttons be another button, which is like nothing's ever done that ever in the game's history. And these things are just running rampant, you know? Like, no one's been, like, moderating these things and been like, is this fine to be in tournament play? Like, who has the say? You know, there's no governing bodies. People can just release, as long as it's not outrightly cheating, like a turbo button that presses A 1,000,000 times a second. Like, there's this weird, like, this razor's edge of just like what's cheating, what's not cheating, like what's fine. Because this thing's called the Goom Wave, this controller. And this razor's edge is, well, this thing just does everything a really good GameCube controller does, so it's fine, right? Like, no one's been able to say, yeah, like, let's pull this back, let's add a bit more of this, like, this is fine, this is not fine. And that's only going to get worse, I think. Especially...
it's worth me pointing out here, by the way, that the reason that this matters is both because the game is as complex as we were talking about before, so your inputs need to be incredibly precise, and because a lot of the complexity of the game is almost accidental, the controllers that we use to play it are not really necessarily designed to actually support that. There's a lot of variability in the quality of the controllers and therefore in your ability to execute those things. So there is a huge incentive for people to create controllers that better support people playing high-level Melee. And then, like you said, it becomes an ethical question of, well, should we allow people who are willing to spend? Because the Goon Wave is like multiple hundreds of dollars, right?
It's like for my one, which I've purchased one, it cost me $600 plus AED. It's not expensive, and it's very expensive. Sorry, and like a regular GameCube controller, you can buy for like $80 AED. But in my personal opinion, nowadays there's like legal modifications to controllers that you can do. You cannot get good at the game with a store-bought controller. There's just so many issues with the game that like there's snapback, which is if I tap like left on the controller, it'll like naturally flick back and forth like a spring, right? Like it'll go like boing or whatever. And when I tap left, it'll go right when I let go of the controller. And you need like a modifier in your controller to say, no, it's just left. Like if you want to play like one of the characters Falco at a professional level, you need to have this thing in your controller. And I'm not going to get too crazy in depth about it, but you definitely can't like just have a regular controller anymore. That's out the window. If you want to be like serious with this game, it's just not feasible.
I'm starting to think that's my problem. It's either that.
You were saying before you have this controller. It might be the worst one I've heard. Apparently, he just loses whenever he touches it. Like, what's going on there?
Yeah, I've never heard anybody else have the same problem. No, you said something. You said something before that I actually thought was really interesting, which is you watch Roger Federer play tennis, and you can't just go and do it like him. But like when Roger Federer hit the greatest heights of his career, you know, those epic sets that he played with, you know, Rafael Nadal at Wimbledon and stuff, he needed a Nadal on the other side of the court to actually truly allow him to express how good he truly was. And Smash as a game, I think, is exactly like that, because we spoke about the structure of a game before. You have a character, your opponent has a character. You've got to hit the opponent's character off the stage. But in order to bring out the most in you technically and tactically, you need somebody who can answer the questions you raise and ask you difficult questions back in the things that they do. And we haven't really spoken about your competitive record so far, but you are head and shoulders better than anybody else in Australia at Melee right now. And so I guess the first question I have for you is, how do you find yourself motivated to continue to try to improve when you don't have, you know, your Rafael Nadal necessarily on the other side of the court all the time?
It's pretty tough, honestly. Like it's been a pretty big mental battle for me, especially because I was given the best in Australia very unceremoniously when Spud, who was the best in Australia, internationally recognized player, like top 30 in the world. He was always like something I was chasing after, right? Because I was second for so long. And then after we went to the US together, he quit. And I never got my win on him. You know, I kind of just like, because there were like tiers of Spud, like big, like Gap, me, Gap, everyone else. And then it was like, now this thing I've been chasing for so long, and like, it's always motivating to play and like, no, you've got a next step. But that was just like crumbled underneath me. I never got to even get there. And I'm like, well, I guess I'm the best now. Like, all right, you know, like I didn't feel like I'd gotten better to get the best, if that makes sense. And that was a big drop in my motivation. That was really tough. But I've always just thought, I wanted to quit at like one point, to be honest. Like I didn't want to play anymore because I was just like, I'm playing and I'm kind of just like stunting on like the people under me. And like SA Nick, who is one of the best players as well in Australia, he was like off and on with the game and he would come back. And it's like, when you're just like beating someone who's like not taking the game serious, it's really hollow. And if he just beats you, it's like, well, I guess my work I put in doesn't mean anything. You don't really have anything to gain, you know, when you're just like playing someone who's retired like that. I wasn't losing to him, luckily, but because I would have crushed me. But it's tough. It's really tough because I guess I just was told, we had a conversation, Nick and I, where I'm like, I think I'm done with the game. I don't really like it anymore. And he's like, you're going to regret it for the rest of your life if you don't give this a fair shot. And that really stuck with me because I'm like, I think that's true. You know, if I don't go to the US and like push this game as hard as I can, for context, I'm going to be going to the US for trying to go for a year to compete overseas in Melee, which is going to be super exciting. But if I don't give it that shot, I'm going to regret that forever because I put so much time. I put like 5 years of my life into this game, right? Like, if I don't give it my true all, that's something that I won't be able to live with because it's just, it'd be so sad. So that's my motivation, is just to like, I'm going in the 1st of December. This 2-year coronavirus time skip of just like nothingness, I've just been practicing and studying as much as I can alone, right? Which is really hard. You can only learn so much when people aren't asking, like you were saying, these problems that like, or these questions that like a higher level player will ask you. And I don't know what's going to happen when I go over there because things that I'm doing that beat players here might just get me crushed over there. I don't know what I don't know. So I'm going in it with a mentality of I'm ready for like everything I think I know about Melee to just get destroyed. And like that is exciting, you know, because it's just like I only ever care about like improving and just like pushing this game further. And if I'm able to do that, even if it means everything I know about the game is a lie, that is so sick, you know, because it's better than this, I guess, limbo of not learning anything new, you know? Like, I don't play the game to win. I play to, like, learn. Like, I want to play the best Melee possible, and I want to say that I'm, like, the best player possible. And just having the opportunity to do that coming so close is, even when it was a year ago, I still kept playing. Because it's just one more year, you know? Like, you're going to, like, once you're through the time skip of coronavirus, like, you won't think about it ever again in your life. You never will. So that's what really pushed me. It was just like, I just have to stick it out. And now that I'm so close, man, I'm so excited. It's going to be so awesome.
I'm excited for you. I can hear it in your voice. So,
dude, it's awesome.
When you are playing the game, like you said, absent that person that you just want to beat, what are the yardsticks you're measuring yourself against to say, like, I am getting better at this game. I'm getting closer, like you said, to playing the best Melee possible. What are you looking for?
What I look for a lot of the time is I watch what I'm doing, like, because I win most of the games. Like, I play against, like, players worse than me. Like, if I'm dropping games, like, usually something's, like, wrong or, like, something like that, which is pretty crazy for Melee because it's a really high variance game and, like, one mistake kills you a lot of the time. So that's, like, something I'm pretty, like, focused on is how do I not lose any games at all. Like, I have to just make the gap wider. That's how I'm trying to improve. I'm like, all right, so this guy's doing this, this, and this. Like, how do I avoid, like, the best things he can do and, like, what he's good at? And then once I solve that, I'm like, okay, I'm going to play into their strategy more, and I'm going to try and outplay it in different ways. Like, it's like answering what's 1 + 1, but then, like, it's like, yeah, it's 2, whatever. But, like, trying to, like, approach it from different ways, you know what I mean? You know when, like, your teacher asks you to show your working out? It's like showing different types of working out. I'm trying to, like, change how I'm thinking about these problems all the time. So I can, like, if I get a problem where my initial thought process won't work, I'll have, like, experience in, like, these other thought processes that are, like, may, like, be able to answer that question. So I'm just trying to, like, broaden my... It's so weird to talk about. I'm trying to, like, broaden my brain and, like, advance my problem-solving skills, even if the problems aren't complex in Australia. And it's really hard to honestly gauge that. Like, there's no real way. I just have to trust the process.
I can understand what you're talking about. I think your explanation with your maths working out makes really good sense. And there's an analogy that might be a little bit tenuous, but is maybe worth pointing out with music, which is that when you're presented with a chord progression, do you play any music, by the way?
No, I don't. I wish I did.
Right. So if you're presented with a chord progression and somebody says you have to improvise a melody over it, there's a whole lot of ways that you can think about, like, rationalizing your decisions melodically. You can look to the chords themselves because chords are made up of notes, and you can look for guiding tones within the chords, and they can tell you roughly where your melody should land as each chord changes. Right. But there's also significance in how we move from one note to the next within a melody. And so, an alternative approach would be to pick a starting tone that sounds good, and then try and create a melodic contour that kind of follows your thoughts or whatever. And you could end up at very similar places going through those two processes or any number of other ones. But the way in which you thought to get there can be quite different. And sometimes it's a very helpful skill when you're practicing music to do drills that force you to sort of change your mode of thinking, because being able to change your mode of thinking often opens you as well to new possibilities that you'd otherwise have overlooked, and that prevents you getting in a rut and being that musician who always plays the same little melodic idea whenever you're called upon to improvise. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I exactly get what you mean, because it kind of is really important, especially in a competitive game where, like, in music, like you're saying, you can get into these ruts, but in a competitive game, this person is trying to, like, pick up on it's talked about a lot, like how similar, like, Melee is like music a lot, specifically jazz people will say, but
we have a lot of jazz pianists in low-level Melee, by the way, and jazz guitarists. I've realized I play against a few guys pretty regularly, and I go back and listen to people commentating, and regularly I hear, Kessler plays guitar or Needles is a jazz guitarist or something. I'm like,
like Saucy's in the Consoles, the video game band. But what was I going to say? Yeah, but honestly, you will hear, like, even the pros like Zane and Mango talk about cadence, like someone's rhythm, and I can honestly put players who are, like, at certain levels into, like, categories. Like, all right, so this guy does a spot dodge here. That means he's probably, like, a panic option guy. So that means in this spot, when I hit him with this, he's going to do another panic option, which will be X or Y. Like that, I don't, like, download people, like, when I say download someone, I mean, like, pick up on their habits. I don't download people, each one individually. People are very similar, where if you do something, and you're at a certain level, you're very likely to do this, because a lot of people who I've seen do this will tend to do that as well. And that's what's so crucial about changing how your brain is working like that, because it's so easy to be like that without even knowing it, And it's also easy to be like that when someone's not punishing you for being like that. Because there's a way to play Melee right now online called Unranked. It just grabs you and another person, you get put together, whatever. And a lot of players on Unranked will play almost the exact same. Like all these Falcos, that identical. They'll do, like, it's almost like watching, like, a synchronized swimming contest. It's like, all right, shoot the laser here, do the back air there, like, do the up tilt here. And you just, like, watch them do this beautiful little dance, but we've seen it all before. Like, they all pick it up from each other, and it's like, I can't tell them apart anymore. Like, I'm like, okay, I'm going to, like, fake out a punch here. He's going to do a kick, and then he's going to panic option, because that's what the guy before him did. Like, it's really hard to get out of those ruts, because, like, they work against worse players all the time. The reason people do these little dances is because these dances work against the majority of people. But you can't improve if you rely on them.
Again, there's something kind of analogous in what you're talking about, where you're looking at players and you're seeing their habits or their traits, and then you begin to form a bit of a global assessment of them. And that sort of simplified idea of this is the type of person who does X guides your future decisions and makes things easier. So, my job, when I'm not talking to people about Nintendo, I coach people for strength sports. And, you will have certain athletes who have movement traits where I go, well, if you squat this way, I bet that your deadlift looks this way too, and almost always that's the case. And same thing if I give somebody a program and their response to me is, one way emotionally or another way emotionally, or they tend to make X or Y type of decision. If I say pick your own weight for this, and there's somebody who picks a much too light weight, characteristically, I'm going to see them probably underestimate their capacity across the rest of their program. And the reverse is true too. You have some people who just go turbo the second you give them a chance. And you begin to put people into a little box where you say, okay, well, this is the person whose squats always look like this, who's going to put too much weight on the bar if I give them a chance. And so that begins to guide your other interactions with them. And before they know it, you are doing a better job too. And I think that the fact that that exact type of thinking can actually guide the way in which you go through this complex problem solving in Melee is really interesting, but also quite beautiful. The fact that it has enough complexity to be exactly like a human interaction in the real world,
It's true, yeah. The thing is that it's not always right, obviously. Like, people are more complex than, like, he's going to do this, this, and this. But it's definitely a lot. It kind of frees up your mental stack, right? Because it's like, okay, if he does this, I'm not going to put, like, and think about anything else other than just he does this. Because it's like, you're thinking about a million different things, right? Like, you can't do that. It's not possible. You're already worrying about enough when you're playing the game. Like, it's easier to just, like, be like, okay, he's probably going to do this, so I'm going to keep an eye out for that. But if he doesn't, it's like, okay, that's fine as well. But it doesn't change that, like, you just pick up on, like, the pattern recognition as well. But you end up trusting the process a lot. Even when it's wrong, 90% of the time it's right, you know?
So, again, at the highest level, it seems to me that people play the game a little bit more like poker, where sometimes, you know, in poker, you might represent having a hand that you don't really have, but you know that that's going to guide your opponent's decision-making and give you either good information or an advantage. At the highest level, it seems to me that sometimes people will try and represent being the type of person who would take X option because they know what your reaction will be, and therefore they can punish what you do, expecting them to do something else. You know, it becomes almost like a game of double crossing.
I actually did that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I had that. I remember one specific one where it was like, for the melee nerds out there, it's like I was playing against Professor Pro, and he up threw me onto a platform at like high damage, and I would tech in place almost every time. It was like a habit I noticed I had. And then we get to the last game, and I'm like, okay, like it's a really tense moment. He knows that I tech in place every time here. I'm not going to tech in place this time because I know that he thinks this is a habit I have. Well, it was a habit I had, but I picked up on it. But I was like saving it. So I had like the lead in like a lot of the games. I'm like, it's okay if I die here. I'm just going to hold on to this. And I did a tech roll instead of a tech in place, and he tried to cover the tech in place, and then I killed him for it. So like being able to like hold on to those reads that they like, and noticing what you're giving them as well, like that, like you said, the Nadal versus a Federer. It's like you can't do that against like people worse than you because they're not even knowing that I'm taking in place every time here. Like they're worrying about enough already. Like they're not paying attention. It's not their fault. The game's really hard. But when you can do that because you have respect for your opponent and like you can think on that level of like, what am I giving this guy? Like, what is he taking in? Like, is he taking it in? You know, I do something as well where like I'll read something every time and then I'll know that they know that I know, and then I won't punish it the last time. And he's like, dude, I did that every time. Why'd you not punish it this time? I'm like, oh, because I knew you knew that. And he's like, what does that mean? Do you know what I mean? It's like hard to describe to someone. Like, He's like, I did this attack every time, but the one time I don't do it, you hit me for not doing it. I'm like, yeah, man, it's because I knew that you knew. And he's like, you're an idiot.
It narrows down the number of decisions you have to make in some ways. Like once you know that this is their stable trait, the only thing you're looking for is if they don't do that, I have to react to it, right? So, you know, that's the concept of a heuristic. It's like, okay, what's a mental shortcut that's going to get me around this problem? And it sounds like you're somebody who's able to very quickly begin to assemble a mental model of how am I going to play the game against a given person, which I personally find that very interesting as somebody who likes to play Smash and who actually struggles quite a lot with that in some ways because the game just happens so quickly around me. I find that a very interesting thing. Yeah. I'm interested.
Yeah.
Go on. No, you go, please.
I was just going to say, it all comes from a very, very solid understanding of the game through just constant watching. Like when I was like, I go to bed watching Melee. Like I wake up, I usually turn a set on or something. I love watching the game so much, and I like pick up on a lot. I'm like, oh, like subconsciously, I'm like, oh, this percent Peach's Nair will do this. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That does that to that character, or like, oh, cool. When at this percent, this character fishes for this. Like, oh, isn't that interesting? Why does he do that? Oh, he does this because this guy's doing like. You kind of like progress with your questions that you're asking, like when you're watching the game, because like you go from the basic ones, and then you've watched like 100 hours, and it's like, okay, I've got all those answered. Let's ask some more questions. Okay, I've got all those answered. Let's ask some more. And then like when you play, you just like think back to the VOD. You're like, oh yeah, minute 22 of Armada versus PPMD. I remember this spot. Like, why did Armada do this? Oh, because this guy does this. This guy does that too. I'm going to do this now. It's like, it's really weird, like to like think about it, but it's just like eventually you've seen it all before, and you know, like you see the spot appear on the screen, and you're like, I know what to do here. Only two things can happen here, and I know that because I've watched enough of the game. But when you haven't, or you haven't played enough, it's like anything can happen on the screen right now. Like, he could fly in the sky, he could like do this, he could do that, he could go. I don't know what's going to happen, but like if you're like studied, you can really like limit down what's going to happen on the screen, so you just don't panic. You know, like you just know where in tennis, you know where the ball's going to go.
It sounds a lot
sense
to me like chess players study positions. You know, they look at very famous moves from very famous games, or they get presented puzzles where they say, like, you know, there's checkmate in 4 moves here. If you do the correct things, what should they be? And so really good chess players, and I have a couple of friends who play like recreationally, but who are still very good, will be able to recognize positions and say, oh, you know, this is the blah, or whatever it happens to be. This is the Spanish opening. I don't play chess, so like whatever.
Yeah.
But they can look at the game and they can recognize familiar situations very quickly and therefore know what is a good response. I'm interested, when I listen to music, I have 2 modes of listening. I have just listening to music where I'm just chilling. And then I have like deep learning listening to music. And the latter is really tiring because I'm paying a lot of attention. I'm trying to pick up nuance. I have to play songs back multiple times because if I'm really listening to the drums, I'll miss something happening in the guitar. You know, and even if I'm listening to the drums, if I'm just focusing on what's happening with the hi-hats, I then have to listen back and hear it in context to hear, well, how does that interact with the other pieces of the kit and so on, before I can really build out my understanding of the song. When you watch Smash, do you ever just have a mode where you're kind of just being a spectator? You know, and when you're watching it deeply, is it like, are you pausing constantly and like looking at things and studying, or is it just watching over you?
It's exactly identical to how you just said it. You can still learn a lot through just watching as a spectator. I guess I have 3 modes, to be honest, where if I'm like simplifying it, I have my mode where like 1 second in the game happens and someone does big kick. I'm like, all right, pause. Why did you big kick? What did the other guy do that made him do the big kick? Is this his normal opener? Why did he do that kick? And then there's like my mode where I'm like,
for the non-Smash playing.
Yeah.
Go on.
And then there's like spectator mode where like I've got either a CC in dry or a Furphy in hand. I've got like a few of the mates on Discord, or we're on a couch watching a big tournament. We're like, yo, that was a sick big kick, and you never think about it again. Like if you're watching a tournament like live, you don't want to be in hyper analysis mode. Like, you know, you just want to like enjoy the moment and enjoy the storylines and just watch the game. And like that's just where it's fun. It's like when you listen to new music, right? Like I wouldn't imagine you'd be like pausing straight away. Like you want to listen to the songs first. You want to enjoy the music for what it is, right? Like save the analysis for later. Some people may want to analyze first, regardless if it's melee or music, and that's fine as well. But I feel like for the majority of people, it's going to be spectate first, then let's have a look properly.
Yeah. I mean, when you listen to music, there's sometimes that part in a song where you go like, ooh, like that's a new idea, or that really hit me. You know, I want to come back and hear that again, or figure out why that was really the case if I'm curious about it musically. But it has to come organically. You know, like I have to have that, wow, that was a cool big kick moment before I want to know why it was a cool big kick at all. You know, like you have to see it first.
Like every big kick doesn't taste the same. Like the big kicks, some big kicks hit different. Like it's definitely true. I was gonna say the third mode is when I'm like kind of watching and like kind of drifting off, like to like sleep on, just like watching games. I'll be like really like not focusing, but it'll be like all I'm like kind of doing. Like I'm not chatting with my mates or anything. I'm just like watching because I just want to watch the melee. And I won't be like pen and paper studying. If I see something like you hear like, oh, that was interesting, I'll like maybe go back over it. But it's not everything. It's not like, okay, he like strummed the guitar here. Why did he strum the guitar like that? Like not off every little thing. It's just you hear the one, and you're like, whoa, that hit different. Like let's take that one back.
So
I have no idea about music, by the way. I hope that that was not clear enough. But
sometimes you do have to wonder why they strummed the guitar at all. So that was no. I'm interested. You're clearly like incredibly enthusiastic about Smash, and I would say like obsessed, given that you wake up watching Melee, fall asleep watching Melee.
I mean,
but
to say,
but I mean, in most things, when people become truly excellent, they have a bit of obsession, right? And I'm interested for you, is that same obsessiveness manifest in other parts of your life?
No,
So
nothing.
Smash just keeps
Nothing hits the same as Melee. Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, I played a lot of video games. Like, when I was like younger, it used to be like League of Legends in high school, and I guess I was like, I didn't like the game. You know, I just played the game because my friends were playing it, and it was like something we would just do together. And team games, it's like you can just like be like, oh, my top laner, like this guy is bad, so we lost because this guy is bad. But with Smash, it's like, well, it's just me on the screen, right? And I'm not like in my core at least, I feel like I'm not a complainer of like, I only lost because this guy did X and Y and those moves are broken. Like, where? Like, no. It's always something you can improve on, especially at the Australian level. So that responsibility is like exciting, you know, especially with like how high the ceiling is, let alone the floor is with this game. It's really gripping, and like you said, it's addicting. Like how similar it is to the poke. You were just chasing that next big combo or that like movement string that makes the crowd scream or something like that. Like nothing in my life has hit like that, and that's why I'm so obsessed with it, because it's just like I want to. I honestly like I don't like I'm kind of modest with it, I guess. But when anyone asks me if I'm good at the game, I'll be like, no, I'm not good at the game. There's so much more to do, you know. Like I'll be like, yeah, I'm all right, but have you seen these guys? Like the top level players are freakish, and that's something that I watch them play, and I'm just like, oh my god, like. This is just, I'm like, look at that. Look at these guys are putting on the screen for us right now. I want to do that. You know, like, I want someone to watch me play and to be like, he's a genius. Like, what? How does he think of that? And, like, that's what I want, you know? Like, that's something... I feel like if I did that with other things, I wouldn't feel like that. Someone's like, whoa, that was so good. I'd be like, yeah, thanks, man. But with this game, I'm like, yeah, I actually did that because of this. Like, here's my working out. Like, it's so gripping. Nothing hits the same as Melee.
And how quickly did you know that you really loved the game?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think pretty quickly. I think after like 2 months and like going to tournaments and stuff, I'm like, yeah, I'm playing this game like all the time. Like I want to keep playing. There was no online or anything, so it was just me in my room with like my TV just practicing. And I was like researching it. I'm like, oh, I can hit this now. Like that's really cool. Like that's, I don't know. And then like when you get that first win and you like, you've probably felt this, but when you're beating people you haven't beat before, it's addicting. It's like, look at me improve. Like, look at me, like I'm beating this guy now. Who's next? You know, like who do I have to beat next? Like, what do I have to do to beat this guy? Let's do that. Then you get the win. You're like, yes, like, okay, next step. It's really like, it's a very interactive progression with Melee, I feel.
Yeah, again, there's something a little bit analogous to strength sports in it, in that in strength sports, there is the competitive aspect. Like, you know, people who are going to a powerlifting competition want to place higher than the next person, you know, each time, and they want to do better than their competitors. But on the way through, you do have the chance to feel yourself improving. You know, you can lift more weight in training that you did before, or lift more competition to competition. And it's that process of showing up and continually experiencing just a little bit of growth, and then being confronted with a couple of new problems that you get the chance to solve, and then the good feelings you have about yourself for solving them, that I think tends to drive people to just want to keep going through that same cycle. And Melee has a little bit of that to it, just in a slightly different way.
I agree. I think it's honestly so different for people because, like, so many, like, when I used to train at least, I was like kind of understanding, like, I was like, oh, I'm lifting heavier now. That's cool. But, like, I didn't feel mentally engaged at the gym in the same way that I feel mentally engaged with Melee. You know what I mean? Like, when you're lifting a weight, like, I'm obviously oversimplifying it because I wasn't, like, crazy at it. But it's just like, yep, weight go up, arm go down, arm go up, arm go down. But in Melee, I'm like, all right, I've hit the back air here. Like, all right, I've hit the L cancel. I think I can shine. Like, you know what I mean? It's so fast. Like, it's like, it's really for Zoomers, Melee, I feel. Like, so many things are happening. And then in the gym, I'm like, nice, I can lift more now. Arm go up, arm go down. Like, that's how it felt for me. But I know, obviously, for other people, there's like the pump you get, you know, there's like so many factors that goes into it.
You know the Bruce Lee quote where it's like, when you start, a punch is a punch and a kick is a kick, and then you learn a little bit and suddenly, you know, no punch is the same and no kick is the same, and then you become a master and a punch is a punch and a kick is a kick. Yeah. There's a little bit of truth to that, certainly in lifting weights, in that like when you first start, you go to a squat and every squat looks the same. And then you learn a little bit, and I can tell you in very complicated biomechanical terms why all these people's squats are different, and how your squat will change if I ask you to hold the bar in a different place. But at the end of the day, I've kind of gone over that hill, and I'm like, a squat's still a squat, and so we're back there. Do you think that with Smash, there's an ability to sort of distill things back from complexity towards simplicity and say, actually, this is what the fundamentals of this game are, and this is sort of how it is?
The thing is, like, I think with Smash, though, is there's so many ways to... So if we just, like, say, like, squat is butt go down, butt go up,
that's
right?
Close to correct, so that's fine.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, butt go down, butt go up. Similar to twerking, but that's just
twerking is just a squat as well, really.
Yeah, if you think about it, if you boil it down. But, like, there's so many ways to get the butt to go down in Melee, It's like, okay, how do I punish this guy jumping out of shields? I'm Fox. I can drill, nair, JC, shine, back air him. I can falling up. Like, there's so many ways to get from point A to point B, and the end result is just not comparable between every single option, Like, and there's like, people say there's a correct option, but I don't think that's, most of the times, like, yeah, you could have gone a regrab here. But it's like, yeah, you can, but you can also do a waveland up tilt. Like, I'm getting crazy with the technical terms, but there's just like such a depth to the game where it's like, there's no bread and butters, it feels like a lot of the time, like at least with the punish game, it's like you can do anything, the way you get to the end, or like, is so different. I honestly feel like playing, I'm hitting stuff I've never hit in my life every day. Like every single day I hit something completely new, while for me when I was going to the gym, it's just like, didn't really feel different. You know what I mean? Like I didn't really feel like I'm doing, like that squat today I did was like crazy. Like, like the form on that, I did like a little twist at the bottom. It was nuts. I like rotated those hips. That's probably going to kill me. But, like I didn't like put some butter on it. Yeah. Like the guy behind me was like, probably stop that. I'm like, I'm just playing my own way, man. Like I'm just lifting my own way. This is how I want to lift. But I feel like Melee lets you do that, But obviously there's stuff you do in the game where it's just like, yeah, probably stop doing that, man. It's like the pitch who does the 50th down smash. He's like, this is like what I want to do. It's like, all right, relax. No.
I'm guilty of that. Actually, personally, but I won't take that.
The guy's breaking his hips at the gym, and we're just like, please stop. Be like, but it's good, man. I swear.
It feels great. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
No, well, the good thing about analogies is that they're allowed to be inexact. That like, if going to the gym was exactly the same as Smash, then I'd be much better at Smash than most people in Australia. But unfortunately, I'm really shitty at the game, so that's how I know the analogy's not that good.
I actually have a question for you. I don't know what, as someone at like where you are with the game, what keeps you playing? Do you like getting better a lot? Like, do you like the journey itself? Like, what's your driving force to continue playing Melee?
I do like getting better. But, you spoke about how sort of enthralled you are with the idea of playing the best possible Melee. I am so far from that point that for me, just improving at Melee at all, and improving at Melee to me doesn't even necessarily mean winning games, because when I go on unranked, I get beaten more often than I win, so that doesn't even bother me especially, but it's the idea that I get closer and closer to expressing what I want to do. And there are little moments that I have where, and particularly because I play two characters, one of whom I'm much better at than the other because I've done almost all my competing with her. And there are little moments sometimes where I find myself doing things where I go, that was a higher level engagement in the game than I previously did. Like there are a couple of times recently where like I haven't been playing as much Peach, but I was playing her on unranked. And I had a couple of moments where I just picked up on someone's habit and I just waited until they took the option that I knew they were going to take. And then I punished them for it. And in that moment, I was like, okay, like I'm improving. And when I play the other character that I play, Falco, where some of the technical aspects of the character are really hard for me, sometimes when I'm just able to extend my punishes a little bit, so I can take those sequences 2 or 3 steps further than I otherwise could, and I'm beginning to find new avenues to extend the way that I play, or when my hands just don't let me down when I'm trying to bring out an idea. Those things are very deeply satisfying to me. And so it's the idea that by continuing to engage in the process, I can find out little things and then see them light in a way that's really dynamic. That to me is very satisfying.
That's sick.
And yeah, it's, again, bad analogy, but it's true, is it's analogous to the gym in that when you train, you're not really obligated to do it on anybody else's terms. Like, one of the reasons why I was a very good rugby player and I stopped playing rugby, and I eventually moved into competing in strength sports. One of the things that appealed to me about strength sports was, unlike rugby, in which I felt like I had a real obligation to like look after my team and try my utmost and show up at every training and all this stuff all the time. When I moved to strength sports, I was like, I'm still motivated to try really hard. But if there ever comes a day when I just don't feel like it, I can just up and leave. Well, the same thing is true for me with Smash, where I can say, look, I'm going to play half an hour most days of the week. Some days I'm going to sit down and really like drill a few things, but it's fine. I can do this on my own terms. And so long as I see those improvements coming, there's satisfaction in it. I don't have to chase being the best, And so you and I may sit at different ends of the spectrum, but the fact that I can, on my terms, still have that satisfaction, I think is like, it's great to me,
That's an entirely respectable way to go about something like this. And that's, honestly, that's kind of leads to another thing I wanted to ask is, I don't think it's in many sports, and I'm not saying I'm like Nadal or anything, but like when there's like a skill gap, like between, let's just like even say between us two, right? And I want you to be completely honest. If we were to play, and or if you were to play like soccer or something like that, who's another really good player, do you enjoy the game? Because at least for me, before like you answer, I think there's a level like gap that happens where the other guy doesn't get to play. And I don't think that really happens in like, people don't play like that usually, like in a casual way, like between that skill discrepancy. That just doesn't happen. Like in other games, there's like ranks, right? Where high level players, like in League of Legends, there's challenger. Challenger players will play challenger players. But like bronze players will play challenger players like a lot in Melee. And like, I have it when I go into unranked, which just puts anyone with anyone. People are like instantly kill someone on their first stock and they just leave straight away. Like, I don't go on unranked anymore because I can't find games because everyone just rage quits a lot of the time. Or I'm playing and I'm not really having a good time because like the other guy's not really playing and it's not his fault. Like, he's just worse. It's not no one's fault, right? Like, there's like a level where it's like, all right, no one's really doing anything here. How do you feel being on the other end of that?
And how does it feel to get?
You can be honest. I'm not going to say it's cringe to be like, you want to leave.
No. Interestingly, I actually find myself more frustrated losing to people who are only a little bit better than me because it really brings into stark relief my own mistakes. And oftentimes I'm like, particularly if I'm not playing well, it pisses me off because I go like, oh man, like, I'm really having my own inadequacies thrown in my face. Whereas like, I have played you in tournament. I've played SOC in tournament. And like, I don't really expect to win. So I don't care if I lose. If that was the only experience I ever had when I played Melee, the game wouldn't be fun. But here and there, like when you and I played, I didn't take a stock off of you.
Sorry, man. There were good games there.
Thank you. But, there were one or two moments where like you didn't quite take my stock as quickly as you could have. And to me, like, and maybe this says something
I still think
my
about
personality.
It, man.
Yeah, I'm sure you've lost sleep over it. But it says something about my personality where to me, I was like, like in the context of that game, that was something I could say I did well, I was able to move my character off to the left when you were trying to dunk me to my death just far enough that you weren't able to hit me. Sure, I didn't get anything from it, but at least that says like I took the right option. And so when the skill gap is huge, I look for little wins. And again, this is something when I'm coaching people in lifting, sometimes I say like, you can have a bad session or like you can even have a really bad week of training, but what can we take from it that was of value? Well, that's how I feel about playing people who are way better than me. Like I set realistic expectations, then I go, okay, what was good from that? But honestly, losing to people who were 10% better than me, that pisses me off like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, it's the worst feeling when it's like a rival or like someone you're like really close with. That L hurts 10 times more. And it's actually, I think your competitive background and like with like you were saying with rugby and like with strength training and like powerlifting coaching, I think that's set the framework up for you to like take these little victories from like losing to like a top player and having a bad week of training, right? Like you still are able to take that. And I think that's a really good skill to have. I've always thought it's interesting to like get that other perspective of the person I just played. Because it's, especially online, it's really easy to dehumanize people. Like all the Falcos start blending together and you're just like, it's like Joey 27 and like Big Dick John 52. Like, who are these people? I don't know them. They're just doing the same thing.
With those names straight off.
Big Dick John. No.
That's funny.
Yeah. No, dude.
Well,
I'll smoke in the next tournament with it.
Again, Melee has this, and most sports have this. Powerlifting doesn't, so this is where that analogy goes. But Melee is really a game where you can look at the result, but the result is made up of a whole bunch of smaller interactions, which is where you were saying the complexity comes from. And, I played in a lot of rugby teams that didn't win as often as we lost. And I like to think that's through no fault of me. I was fine. But, like, here and there, you're going to lose games of rugby. But just because you lose a whole game doesn't mean that there weren't good things to take from it. And I don't think I'd have liked rugby much if the only yardstick that I ever had for how was I going was like, did my team get up on the scoreboard? Because
was it a dub or not? Like,
yeah, and I think that would be a very shallow way to look at a game as complicated as Smash.
I had a lot of trouble looking at losses as well. Like, that's some losses hurt, man. Like, I'll watch a set where I got like clean swept, no worries. That it's like a game 5 last hit, like next hit wins. Those ones hurt. Those ones, like, you have to relive the pain of losing. Sometimes, I don't know, I find it really hard to just like, actually an example that Zane does is after he loses a big tournament like that, he'll straight away rewatch the set. Like, he'll instantly put like the VOD back on, watch it, so he peels the band-aid off, he calls it. And I think that's a really good skill. But that's something I still struggle with. There's some sets I've left for too long, I'll never watch again. Like, ever. Like, they just hurt too much. Like, there's one set, like, it was like a big tournament. It's like when I was on the up and up. Like, everyone thought I was going to win. Like, I lost to Deca when, like, everyone was like, you're going to beat Dave. Easy, man. Easy. I put a lot of pressure on myself. And I was so gutted. I, like, went outside. I was, like, teary-eyed. I'm like, I wanted this so much. I was so close. Like, it absolutely ruined me. So, one second. I'll plug my headset.
No, you're right.
But, yeah, I think you have to balance that, though.
Yeah, I mean, I've had not quite as high stakes, but I've had a number of losses in Melee in little tournaments where it has come down to the last hit. And oftentimes I've blown it. And it is very frustrating. But at the same time, you do sort of have to just, take your L's here and there and say, like, they got up, they deserved it in this instance, and, there's something that I can do to improve. And the satisfaction of coming back from that to occasionally then beat those players is also part of what being competitive is all about. I'm interested for you specifically, given that losing is not a habit for you now, how you anticipate going if you do happen to go overseas and come off second best.
I am very excited to lose again, to be honest. It's just, if I lose here, I don't mind if it's like, I obviously respect the players here. Like, I respect the work they put in. I know that I'm much better than them. Like, if I lose, I know I did something wrong a lot of the time. Like, if I was to lose to like McLeod or Sock, like, I've told you, like I said before, I don't lose friendlies. Like, if I drop a friendly, something's probably gone wrong in the game. So if I was to lose a tournament set, I would know and obviously if they hadn't done anything better, right? Like, if they have a new strategy or they got 10 times faster, I would feel fine about it. But I would be like, oh, like, I just played bad. Like, this feels awful. Playing like these new players, right? And like these new experiences, I'm okay to lose to that. Like I was saying before, I'm fine for my whole framework or Melee to just get crushed and revamped, because I felt like the other end of that where I don't lose anymore, and I hate it. It's absolutely awful. I'm like, I'm like not really sure what to get from it. Like, the game is still fun, but the game is so much more fun when you're going back and forth with someone, Like, I feel like even no matter what level you're on, the most fun sessions you have is a session where you're having even games with someone, or because no one enjoys a session when they're just like smoking someone. It's like, yeah, cool, one again. It's like being on the pokies and you win every time. No matter how much money you make, eventually you're going to walk away because it's like, this isn't really fun anymore. Like, it just gives me the dopamine every time. Like, all right, like that earned victory is so different. And if it costs a few losses, like, and just getting smoked by strategies I haven't seen before, I'm fine for that. You know, it's just a new problem, right? That's what I want more than anything is new problems.
So it's you have what sounds like a very healthy mindset where winning and losing in and of themselves aren't the thing that's important to you. It's how you feel that you represented yourself, and losing to a worthy opponent is not a problem, but losing to someone
absolutely.
you feel like you've represented yourself poorly is.
And I think there's people, especially because I've kind of just said, I don't think most Australians are worthy opponents. It's I guess that's kind of harsh to say, you know what I mean? Because I know these people are putting in a lot of work and everything like that. But I think there's a level where you just go all right, but you haven't taken a friendly in 3 days. It's where do we draw the line of okay, maybe there's a really big gap. And if you beat me, there's something that's going on. You know what I mean? But people, the game isn't putting numbers into a computer and you're going to get the same result every time. So many things can happen on a day. Someone can wake up and play the best they've ever played and never get that again, right? There's so many things that can happen. So I'm not trying to say I will never lose to an Australian, but I'm saying it's a very low chance and it's really frustrating if I do.
So something you've said in passing a few times is that people do play the game very much as individuals, right? We all have different play styles. We have different traits that tell us how we want to approach a problem. And you do coach other players at Melee. So when you're teaching people the game, how do you sort of walk the line between talking about what might be quote unquote optimal or the safest bet for them versus sort of teaching them to embrace their own innate tendencies? How do you see that balance?
Right. We were discussing before about Melee having a really high skill floor. I feel a lot of the students that I've had, my philosophy on Melee is you have to be this tall to ride the ride. You have to have your punish to be are you hitting for 60% plus? Why aren't you hitting for 60% plus? And they're oh, but I do backdash too much here. And I'm don't worry about that. Why aren't you hitting for 60 plus? There's things you have to go through first that are mandatory before you even start talking about the neutral part of the game. For just really basic terms, the game's split into two things. Neutral, which is when both players are on the stage, no one has an advantage, no one's hit the other guy yet. And it's you're trying to find an opening. And punish, which is you've got your opening, how much damage can you get hit, or can you kill them from one opening? And you'd much rather be the guy who kills in one or two openings than the guy who wins neutral a million times. Because it doesn't matter how many times you win neutral. If you're hitting 5-10% off your neutral openings, it doesn't matter. Because the guy who hits harder will always win. And that's what's really frustrating about Melee. And when a lot of people talk about the beauty of the game, this is the evil dark side where you have to have this many hours in the game and you have to hit this hard before you're ever going to beat anyone who's good. And that's what's really frustrating. So I tell them, I'm pretty upfront. I'm you just need to practice more. I'm yep, we see this opening here. Oh, you hit for 10%. Really good opening. Didn't do anything off it. That's the case 100% of the time. I've never seen a player who I'm talking to and I'm wow, your punish, that was perfect. I have nothing to critique on your punish. It's all right. It's not even in this spot, do X, do Y, do X, do Y. I just tell them to play against a computer, hit the computer around and really think about what to do next, you know? And when they're watching videos, be I remember this spot. I got lost here. What does this professional player do? And then I try to teach my students how to learn more than anything. I don't try to spoon feed them. Just press this button next time, sweetie. That's all you had to do. Thanks for your $40, man. No, it's hey, man, this is how I got good. This is how you can get good. Let me show you. And it's I'm trying to give them lifelong skills so they never have to come back to me. Because I don't look, we can go over the same problems forever, but they're going to run into new problems a week later. Because one problem will usually make you solve that, two more problems show up now. That's just the way the game is. So I want them to be able to solve those two problems when they show up, rather than coming back with the two problems being help me, these are happening now. Because no one gains anything from there, right? You can only like, I guess, carry someone so far until they get to a level where they're like, look, there's too many problems. You got to figure this out yourself.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I could do lifting weights analogies all day, which is actually part of why, it's part of why I wanted to do this discussion, because talking to people about getting better at Smash, I go, man, there's so much of this that echoes the wisdom that I sort of come across in my profession. You can try and finesse your way to improvements lots and lots of ways, but very often the answer is really you just have to knuckle down and do hard work and give it time. You know, lots of people will try and find the perfect technique that helps them lift 20 more kilos when the answer is 3 more months and gaining 2 kilos of muscle. Like, you know, there's just sometimes work that has to be done to get you from A to B, and being able to recognize that even in a really complicated field is cool. The final question that I have for you is, people, like, lots of people are pretty good at Smash, but some people just happen to do a whole lot better in competition than other people. So is there a difference really between being just a good Super Smash Bros. Player and a really good competitor? And if so, what is it?
I think being a good competitor and a good Smash player are very night and day. Like, they're very different things. I'm, again, Greek grandparents. I grew up in or just Greek family in general, in a WOG background, where when I'm like playing or just like focusing, I have my 3 little sisters who are like 9, 6, and 3 screaming in the back. Like, my stepmom's screaming at them, like, just people screaming in my like house. And I'm like trained to just zone it out. Like, because it's just every day, like every single day, just like screaming children, like, you know, like people arguing or whatever. I don't like it. I'm not phased. And when I go on stage and I hear someone cheering for the other guy, or like even people cheering for you can throw you off. Like, recently, one of the pro players, Ghidorah, was like, it really threw me off when the crowd was cheering for me and like, you got this. I don't hear it. Like, when I'm on the stage, I don't hear anything. And like, I think there's like skills like that, which some people learn in other ways, like with me, just like my household. Some people have these skills that just make them better competitors. And it doesn't matter how many hours you put into the game, because there's external factors that will impact how you play that you need to work on. So like, for some people, the nerves, you know, like they eat away at you. I have extremely bad anxiety in tournament. I can't eat on tournament days. Like, I'm in the bathroom all the time. I get really nervous, sweaty palms, a lot like that. Some people just don't have that. Just, they straight up have never had that at all. They're just like really calm on the tournament days. It's things like that that you need to deal with, and playing more melee isn't going to fix that. You know, like you have to attack these problems that contribute to how you play a video game without playing the video game. And it's really weird, right? Like, the mentality behind it is such a key factor that I feel like not enough people put thought into, because gamers are just like usually unhealthy, right? Like, they have a really shit diet, they have a really shit sleep. I'm guilty as fucking charged here. I just had kefas for lunch. Like, God. But it's, these things will 100% contribute to how you play in tournament. Like, everyone knows it. So like, you'll see like players like SFAT, if you like a good competitive melee Fox player, he is like really healthy. He really looks after his body. In between games, he like amps himself up. He like jumps around. He's known for that. Like, just to like, but he does this all the time. Like, he makes the game feel the same, whether it's a high pressure tournament set or just a normal game. And that's something that a strategy outside of the game that makes him a great competitor, is he knows how to make the game feel like he's just playing in his room. And like, those things like that have nothing to do with being a great Smash player and practicing a lot. Like, I think being a strong competitor is universal between anything. Like, if you're like going in like a lifting competition, right, you need to be in that good headspace. What if I can't lift that weight? Like, everyone's watching, people are cheering. I'm so scared right now. I'm shaking. I'm like feeling really weak. I feel sick. I haven't eaten. You're never going to be able to perform your best under those conditions. So tackling them is critical. Yeah, and you know, there's a couple of elements that we use in physical training that, again, are entirely analogous to melee. So one is just preparation itself, because, you know, even if you have the best mental approach to the game ever, if you just suck at it, you're still not going to be any good. So you still actually have to have the fundamental skill set. But the other one is arousal control. So with lifters that I coach, one of the things we start to do is try to recognize, when do you lift your best? I tend to do really well at a sort of moderate to calm mindset. Like,
I'll be slightly elevated. My heart will be pumping. I'll be breathing deeply, but I'm not screaming and bouncing off the walls or anything like that. Like I'm a little bit excited, and I take those elevations in my heart rate and stuff as like a sign that I'm ready to compete or I'm ready to go lift something. And that's actually been something that I found a little bit harder with Melee, where when my heart starts beating and things I'm trying really hard, to me, that if anything throws me off because I haven't quite yet come to say, okay, this is my body. This is my body responding to my mind, you know, because it doesn't feel the same. Like I'm just holding a GameCube controller. I'm not trying to.
Yeah, it's super different.
Yeah, but there are
it's honestly
people.
Yeah.
Oh, you go.
I was going to say, it's kind of like the difference between like an IRL tournament compared to online. Super different environments. Yeah. Like, you're just sitting in your room, but you have like this pressure on you, but you're not really talking to anyone. You're just like, okay, a lot of pressure, and I'm just like in my room right now. I like, don't like this. It's uncomfortable almost, you know?
It's very weird. But, you know, in contrast to me, so I'm pretty chill. There are guys who will beat themselves over the head with a wire brush before they go lift weights. Like, they'll do really weird shit. Yeah. There was one guy I went to a competition at one stage who would headbutt the bar before each of his squat attempts, and he was squatting like 400 kilos. And I remember he headbutted the bar really hard before his third squat, like hard enough that I'd have knocked myself out. This guy was like a Neanderthal. Anyway, he's unracked 400 kilos, and the blood pressure increase from having that much weight on his back meant that like the little cuts that he'd put on his head started pouring blood. And so this guy's standing there with blood gushing down his face and he's screaming, but it was entirely thought out. That is how he lifts best. And then there's another woman who's one of the best lifters in the world who will read a book between her attempts in competition. And she walks out on the platform, you know, not a drop of sweat on her, lifts world record level weights, then walks off again. But either way, you've got to be able to recognize, well, how do I do best? Am I a person who needs to beat my head against the bar and bleed, or am I
do I need to bleed out?
Bring myself down. And once you know those things, you then have to find, well, what are the ways to do it? So, you know, Espat goes and jumps on his trampoline. I remember seeing the video of him doing that in his room. Like, being able to recognize those things, then say, okay, well, what are my strategies to do that? And how can I sort of assure myself that my bodily responses are okay? That's important. I know all that stuff about lifting weights. I have no idea how to put it in play with an intended. But, you know, like, it's in here.
Yeah, absolutely. This, what you're talking about, I talked about it with a sports psychologist I recently started talking to. I think it's reversal theory, it's called. Okay. It's like whether you're like in a relaxed state, an excited state, or like if you feel, it's like paratelic or non-paratelic, I think it is.
Sympathetic and parasympathetic, is that what you're talking about?
No. It's paratelic. Hold on, I'm going to send it to you on.
I'll be curious to read it. Paratelic. Okay, I haven't heard that term. In fact, I haven't heard reversal theory, but there are a few theories that describe what we think of as optimal arousal.
Yeah, it's all about
not being
the arousal level.
Aroused you are in a sexual sense, but how aroused you are in like a psychological sense.
I'm definitely not like popping a chub like playing Super Smash Brothers Melee. I'm definitely yeah. I mean, we had a good set, man. It was kind of, you know.
If you feel that good about it, then that might explain why I'm addicted for a reason. So much.
Yeah. I was going to say I'm obsessed for a reason, but I wanted to ask you something, but honestly, I've forgotten. I hope you just keep playing, man. I think you and your co-TO Bundle are bringing some great stuff to the scene. To be honest, it's nice that you guys are like the new players. Honestly, are what keep the game alive, especially in such a small community. So it's super interesting when like for me, it was like random guys just like show up and be like, "Yo, we're running this now. Like, come to this. It's sick." And we're like, "All right, man, sure." Like everyone gets around it. You know, it's so cool.
Yeah, that has been one thing that I've found quite extraordinary about the community is just how collective the enthusiasm is and how excited people are to see you involved. There's certainly no gatekeeping, so that does make it a very approachable thing. Josh, I've really appreciated you being here. If you think of that question while you're telling people where they can find you and stuff online, then by all means ask it. But otherwise, your last job is just let people know who you are, where they can find you, and anything exciting that's in the mix for you.
No problem. So my tag is Sora. Name's obviously Josh. You can follow me on @LilTrickshot, LIL Trickshot on Twitter. I'll be posting a lot of updates for my US trip, which is coming on the 1st of December. I'll be going there for 3 months to compete against the US's best. I'll be doing that Smash World Tour tournament I was talking about before, which I'm super excited about. But yeah, definitely follow me there. And shout outs to Burke for running this. This is super cool. Definitely check out his other stuff as well.
Cool. Thanks so much, man.
No problem. Take it easy, man.